For many years, we have seen lots of companies all around the globe um, advancing their digitalization journey and becoming truly cloud native and migrating over to public cloud. But in the last few years, we have seen a bit of a different trend that really took off, especially in the last 2 years, which is called cloud repatriation, which basically means that quite a few companies started the journey of migrating all of their systems or parts of their systems back to on premises or to private cloud. And in this episode, myself and Michael will talk a little bit about that and reflect a bit on what we think about cloud repatriation. My name is Kristina and
I'm Michael Levan.
welcome everyone to episode number 2 of the Engineering Revised podcast.
Yes.
So, quite an interesting topic, quite a hot topic these days as well. I don't know if you have seen it yourself, Michael, but I've seen quite a lot of discussions going back and forth in the community lately on this. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think the whole base camp thing kind of kicked it off, right?
Oh, yeah.
It was kind of moved everything back on prem, and yeah, it's ironic. I think that when you're in the engineering space for long enough, and this is when you kind of know that you're getting old, perhaps, or you've just been doing it for a really long time. We see this 360, right? Like we started on prem, and then we got to everything's going in the cloud, and now we're like back to on prem.
Yeah,
So
the circle of life or or something, the samsara wheel, I don't know.
yeah, and it's funny, right? Because we we see everybody like kind of not freaking out about it, but like talking about it. And for us, it's kind of like, nah, yeah, we've we've done this already. So
Yeah.
it's not a big deal, you know what I mean? It's like when you go through, 5 recessions in your life, the sixth one, you're kind of just like, ah, I've been here before. And I think that's ultimately where hybrid is coming into play. So things like Azure Stack, HCI, and AWS Outposts, and EKS Anywhere, and all those different systems and solutions.
Yeah, because I think like maybe the danger, in a way, like the danger or a misconception of this trend as well is that the first thing people think about when they hear about all this, we left the cloud and fully migrated to on premises, and then it gives like an impression about that in all cases for everyone now we need to move everything away from public cloud and to rent our own racks with servers and maybe build our own data center and stuff. But it's not necessarily why this is happening and how every single company should do it. There are so many options there, and hybrid can in a way give you a bit of both, where you could utilize the best of both worlds depending on what your application's needs are.
Right. Yeah. And I honestly, I think that's why a lot of the cloud providers are now trying to do the whole hybrid thing, because there was a time 2014, 2015, give or take, where the cloud providers were like, there's going to be no more on-prem. Everybody's going to move to the cloud. And then, at some point, everybody was like, oh, I guess not everybody's moving to the cloud. And that's when you started
Mm.
to see like the hybrid style solutions coming out and stuff like that. So to your point, sometimes the trend is not something that you should be following. Like it's
Yeah.
we're never going to be at a point where like everything should be in the cloud or everything should be on prem. It's all based on your workloads.
Yeah, but that's like we've seen in the history, with Kubernetes, right? There is maybe is still a trend that everybody needs to host their workloads on
Mhm.
Kubernetes when it's not it's not that simple. Like it's not that black and white that it's either Kubernetes or not. That also truly depends on what use case you are in. And we kind of see the same, like when there is a new trend that comes out now, maybe with WebAssembly, the same situation will happen now that everyone needs to convert all their applications to run on WebAssembly. And but I think like that's not always how you should do that. You would need to actually sit down and think about it. Will you actually gain any real value out of following this specific trend? Would it work for you? Because the answer is not always yes.
Right, right. And I think that is it's becoming increasingly difficult for people to see those lines, right?
Mm,
Especially for new engineers, because new engineers, we live in a world of instant gratification, right? We live in a world of now, now, now. Everything's got to be like this. So when something new comes out, everybody's on it. Why? Because everybody thinks they have to be on it. And for new engineers, it's really difficult. For people that have been in the field for X amount of years or whatever, it's a little bit easier to kind of read between the lines. And that's like we can kind of see that with AI, right?
mm,
I got the email recently that the AI, one of the AI events with Linux Foundation was canceled. Why was it canceled? Because there's too many AI events going on. Literally, that's what the email said. The email was like, "There's too many AI events going on, so there's no reason for us to do this." And that's just kind of what we see, right? And it's the same thing with Kubernetes or going 100% on cloud or going 100% off. As soon as everybody sees one thing, it just turns into this spiral of trend, I guess is the best way to put it. So you really need to take a step back and see and understand the landscape and what's happening and this and that. Um, and then there are
mm.
also just the trends that continue to go. Just for example, I you know I just I keep having this conversation and it's still kind of mind blowing to me, but there's still a lot of talk out there that you can't run stateful workloads on Kubernetes or you
Yeah.
can't do database work on Kubernetes. And it's like this has been a long running thing that people have continued to talk about, yet it's not it's not true, right? And so it's the same thing with any trending topic. You really got to dive into it and see for yourself the way that it works, with
Mm,
cloud
mm.
repatriation, with anything.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And I think that's where like one thing is important, of course, that we follow what the new tools and technologies are coming out and test it out. But then what really matters, and I think what really would be valued by many companies is like having that how would you the pragmatic, there is a book, I think it's called like the pragmatic programmer or
Yeah,
something, if
yeah.
I'm not mistaken. So I guess having that pragmatic mind and thinking from the perspective of the project where you are, okay, this is very cool, but what will it take to implement it? What kind of value would it bring? What are the alternatives and what would we go for? Seeing the broader picture
Mhm.
and evaluating that not according to what is has the largest hype lately in the community, but what would like actually bring value to your company and maybe make the life of you and other engineers and end users better in terms of using the products and platforms you're building. So I totally agree with you on that. And on the other hand, I kind of understand why this is happening, like why this cloud repatriation is happening, because we've seen how many companies are actually struggling with managing the cost of their public cloud services. And of course, with the geopolitical situation and economical situation changing, public cloud providers, like any business, would also adjust their prices and increase their prices for their services.
Mm.
And then if you haven't been using that efficiently, like in many cases of lift and shift, where you don't adjust how your applications are built, what kind of services they're using, how optimized those applications are, then you kind of would really struggle, or maybe you don't have enough knowledge about the alternative services available to reach the same goal
Mhm.
in public cloud, and then you go for the service that may not be the most efficient one and will be maybe more expensive, and then you end up like having this struggle of kind of balancing the cost. And I've heard quite a few stories also from customers that have been like paying hundreds of thousands of dollars per month with very few services they actually have implemented. So I guess this has been like maybe one of the biggest drivers from what I could see for why this journey back to on-prem is happening. I don't know if you had the same like experience feeling about that.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of a few things. I think it's the cost factor, right? Because that was another big thing in the beginning of this whole, you know, everybody's moving to the cloud. Everybody said they were going to save money and cut costs and blah blah blah, and it's not the case. Well, I guess depending on how you look at it, because the whole idea was with these abstraction layers, right? And this is again, this is a trend that we always see with the abstraction layers of the cloud. You had the ability to cut down on salaries, right? You didn't need as many engineers. So, you know, what's the average cloud engineer making now? Maybe between 120 and 160 per year, give or take.
Mm,
Maybe I depending on where you are and stuff, of course, right? Like if you're in New York, if you're in NYC, New York City, could push 160 to 190, right? Depending on where you are. Um, so the whole idea was, hey, you come to the cloud, you don't have to worry about paying $1 million in salary, right? You can kind of cut your team in half or a quarter of the way, uh, and you'll be good. And that wasn't the case. You actually needed more people
mm,
to do the work. And this is an ever growing trend that we see, right? We saw the same thing with automation when PowerShell and overall scripting for sysadmin style folks started to get more popular. Everybody was like, we're going to lose our jobs. It turned out making more jobs, right? And I think the same thing with AI is going to occur. Everybody's like, it's going to take our jobs. And I think it's going to make our jobs way harder. We just have to kind of
yeah.
wait. But there was the cost aspect of things there. There's also what you're getting in the cloud versus what you can do if you manage everything yourself. And in the next episode, we're going to be talking about, managed Kubernetes services versus running, raw Kubernetes,
Mm,
bare metal Kubernetes. And it's the same rules apply here. When you use somebody else's system, right, infrastructure, platform, whatever, you have to abide by their rules, what they have to offer. Versus if you do it in your own systems, sure, there's more work. Well, I maybe not, right? Because again, there's so many different things you need to understand in the cloud. So maybe it's not more, I don't think it's more work. I think it's just a different style of work. So you kind of lose that extendability in terms of being able to do what you want. So I think that's number two, where we're seeing a lot of environments kind of moving back on prem. And then the second thing, or I'm sorry, the third thing as well, I, I often wonder if it has to do with performance, because I've
mm,
heard this a couple of times where it was like, we're not getting the network bandwidth we thought, or we're not as performant as we were when we were on prem. Uh, and like in Basecamp's situation, for example, they pretty much were like, we still retained all the engineers, so we didn't save money that way. We
mm.
still had our data centers, so we didn't save money that way. So like there wasn't any point for them to be spending millions of dollars in the cloud. And that's another thing as well. If you have the talent already and you have the infrastructure and the systems and the location, it doesn't make sense, right? Versus
Mm.
let's say you're a startup and you got it's you and two other people. Yeah, not having a data center makes a heck of a lot of sense.
Yeah, yeah. I think if I remember correctly, with Basecamp, they already had some services that were running on premises, and they had all this. agreement set up, for example, where Dell came in and delivered all the necessary servers, and you didn't need to have people in the company that would all the time travel to those data centers, set up those server racks, set up all the cabling, all that stuff. And we need to remember that if you don't have that kind of agreement, then you would need to actually have people who know how to do that. And what if you started your journey to public cloud initially and you hired people that are public cloud engineers? They have specialization in with specific public cloud provider, or maybe multiple ones, and then you suddenly end up going back, let's say fully back, not having a hybrid approach. So then you would actually need to have people who would know how to set this up. And if not, if you, for example, have an agreement with someone like Base Farm does, it would still cost, like I think Base Farm also share themselves, that it also costs quite a lot for
Mhm.
them, for that Dell comes in and fixes this. But in terms of their scale, there is no way around it. But at least it's less than what they did on in public cloud. But then you would still need to like set up the proper automation to change the way you have been doing things for public cloud. Maybe you still have some kind of vendor lock-in often,
Mhm.
even in terms of like infrastructure as code, and how you have been setting up things or in public cloud. So then you would need to like switch it all around and think, okay, how can you do this efficiently for on-prem? Because if you are to scale, you would want in to scale dynamically as well. So you can't like every time wait for months for a new, or weeks for a new server to come up. So and get ready and get connected into the same server rack. So there are other details that come in that you would need to think about as well. So it's not like a straightforward, easy switch either, especially if you don't have people with the necessary competence in the company to do this migration.
Right. Yeah, and that's a really good point, and that's something that everybody has to think about as well. You got to test to see if something's going to work. You have to have some type of confirmation that what you're trying to implement makes sense. You can't go based off of tweets or whatever that you read on Reddit, right? If somebody said, if you see 1,000 people saying, yeah, everybody should move back on prem, you you can't just do it because everybody else is saying it. Like regardless
Mm,
of uh, everybody saying, oh, it's going to work, oh, this, oh, that, oh, blah, blah, blah. You have to go and test it in your environment to see if it's going to work because very rarely is anything equal throughout organizations. Like I've walked into tons of organizations where they're all using the cloud, they're all using Kubernetes, they're all using the same underlying stuff, but none of them ever operated the same way ever.
mm,
There's always a custom piece to every organization, whether it's how they're deploying, whether it's the verbiage that they're using, whether it's the one particular backend system that is custom in some way, shape, or form. Could just be something as simple as the workflow, right? Everything could be the same except how you get from A to Z could be different. So you always have to go in and test and ensure that it's going to work for you. And then the other piece
mm,
of it is, like you said, the expertise. Like if you have cloud engineers, cool. Do they know how to rack and if you don't have like a service agreement like with Dell or whoever, do they know how to rack and stack? Do they know how to wire? Do they know how to set up routers and switches and firewalls, etc.? Like these are the things that we have to think about before we just say, okay, let's save money. And again, I think it really goes back to like tech is becoming trendy. Like the way that everything is being thought of, like 10 years ago it wasn't like that. You know what I mean? It was a different world, but now everything is very trendy in tech because we're getting trendy everywhere else. So the same mindset is just kind of formulating in the engineering realm as well. But just never forget that you have to be able to troubleshoot, you have to be able to test, you have to be able to understand what you are implementing. Despite, I don't care if 1,000 people tell you to do it, make sure you know what you're doing before you listen to those people. And I think that's going to be a big thing with, moving back on prem. And perhaps that's where these hybrid style solutions kind of come into play. So maybe we could chat about that a little bit, just like
Mm.
Google Anthos, uh, Azure Stack HCI, EKS Anywhere, AWS Outpost, right? Like they're all kind of this hybrid
Yeah,
model.
Azure Arc, I would guess it's also
Azure Arc,
a bit, also
yeah,
very interesting. Yeah.
right.
Yeah, I think this also has a big potential because you suddenly get a few more opportunities to kind of utilize some services that are being offered by the public cloud providers where it makes sense for some of your applications, while you would still for the use cases where it would be more optimal to run on premises, you would do that. And at least, like, I've been using Azure Arc, for example, for some time, because one of the projects that I've been working with was about having a single observability platform, for example, for the private cloud setup and for the public cloud setup, because there were two different offerings, but it would have been good to like have a single observability platform to monitor and troubleshoot and kind of measure, for example, performance between releases, both in private cloud and in public cloud. And that's kind of where Azure Arc made sense to utilize together with Azure Monitor, to kind of achieve this thing, because you could then connect and measure performance also of the setup that is running in private cloud. And that is like a simple example of how you could get the benefit of public cloud while you still have a piece of your or some of your applications and systems running in different environments. And that's where I believe there can be a lot of interesting use cases. And in general, it is an interesting, like, from the technical perspective, for me, it has been, for example, an interesting experience to, like, because it's pretty complicated in a way as well. Like, how would you integrate, for example, the services that are running on-prem with
Mhm.
and the services that are running in public cloud? You would need to do it in a secure manner. You would need to ensure that there is no data leakage and nothing. So it's also, like, from the technical perspective, quite an interesting project to
Yeah,
do.
for sure. One of the other things that come to mind for me as well is, like, if we're thinking about the hybrid cloud model as a whole, there are just some things that are easier to do in the cloud than on prem.
Mm.
For example, I'd much rather use something like Azure Active Directory than like having to spin up AD clusters and servers on prem, right? Because then we're talking about all like the FSMO roles. We're talking about ensuring that people know group policies. We're ensuring that we have enough servers across multiple availability zones on prem to be able to know that high availability will occur, right? Because if your AD server goes down and your environment isn't cached, guess what? You're not logging in anywhere. So
Mm.
like, but you don't have to worry about that if you're using something like Azure Active Directory, and you could still use Azure Active Directory to authenticate to on-prem workloads and stuff like that, which is cool.
Mm.
So yeah, like things like that. Even storage. Storage is arguably way easier in the cloud. Uh, just because
Mm.
you're not worrying about managing a bunch of sands and ensuring that they're highly available and doing all the backups of the backups of the backups and figuring out a place to put those and yada yada blah blah blah. Yeah, so there are definitely things from like the hybrid model that makes sense. And I would say even scalability. I mean, we've all kind of heard the horror stories of the cloud, right? Like the cloud isn't this one location where you just put your stuff and it's all good forever. I mean,
Mm.
there was I don't know if you saw, but there was like the one thing recently with GCP, like didn't it lose like
Oh yeah, that was
millions of,
scary. Backup, wasn't that like the fully wiped one customer's? Oh, I
yeah,
don't remember if it was one customer's data or something.
right,
That was the one scary story we were afraid of for many years to happen, and now
right.
now
Yeah.
it did.
And I mean something like that, it's like that's why I believe more in the hybrid model than I
Mm,
do in the multi-cloud model. Because the multi-cloud model, I feel like to me, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Because primarily I see a lot of people going multi-cloud if they want like high availability or something. But here's the thing, if you all the clouds, like if you're in, let's say, AWS and you're using US East 1 as your region, and then you're like, oh, I want some high availability, so I'm going to go to Azure and I'm going to use US East 1 there. Geographically, they're in the data centers are in the same place, so if one goes down, the other one's going to go down. So I always think like multi AZ makes a lot of sense in one cloud, or hybrid cloud makes a lot of sense because your maybe your primary workloads are still running in the cloud. That's fine, but you're still pushing data and utilizing things on prem as well. And that's why like Azure Stack HCI is really cool, right? Because you can manage your on-prem Kubernetes clusters as if they were in the cloud. Like everything's managed the same way. The tools are all the same. Nothing is different. Yet geographically and logically, it is, right? So if US East 1 goes down at some point for whatever reason, you know everything in your on-prem data center is still working properly, right? And
mm.
of course, that's not doable for all organizations. You know, I've certainly worked in my fair share of startups where their server room also shared as the snack room and the toilet paper room and the paper towel room,
Wow.
everything else.
Okay.
Yeah, super fun stuff. But that's like even if you're in that situation, it still may be uh, a logical approach, right? Because a
Mm,
smaller company, like if you're like one office with 30, 40 people or whatever, chances are you don't have a data center. Chances are like you have some room in that office where you're racking and stacking, whether it's servers, whether it's network equipment, etc. So that shouldn't be your end all be all, but that could be your secondary location. There's nothing wrong with that
mm.
if your primary is in the cloud. So that's what are your thoughts on the whole multi-cloud thing? I mean, do you think it makes sense, or do you think it like multi-AZ makes more sense?
To be honest, if I am completely honest, I feel like it's more a path of increasing complexity and
Yeah.
creating more cognitive overload, to be honest, because you would need to have proper competence in multiple clouds to be able to utilize it efficiently and also cost efficiently and know well how to configure it. And public clouds are not like necessarily 100% equal. There are differences, and you need to have people who know about those differences and how things should be set up. And then the way you implement that, you would
Mm,
also, even with Terraform, right? If we talk about infrastructure as code, like even with Terraform, you would still you can't use the same. Like you would need to use different providers to define
mm,
different types of resources that may have different properties. So you can't create a single Terraform file and say that these resources will go across all the public cloud providers, right? So even if Terraform has been known for being vendor agnostic or vendor neutral, it's it's not like necessarily the way you may interpret it. You would still need to implement it in a different a bit different manner depending on the public cloud provider. So for me, like these things would at least contribute to a bit more complexity and requirements also internally from your teams. Um, and then like the question is how much value and benefit would you gain from that? For example, one story that I hear a lot about to go with multi-cloud approach is when you could truly benefit in terms of cost efficiency. So you would use this service in AWS because it's much cheaper than the others, and then you would
Mm,
use this service in Azure because it's much cheaper than in the other public cloud providers. But I'm wondering, like, how much value you actually, how much cost decrease you would actually get from that if you compare that to the amount of effort and time you put in,
yeah.
and the amount of hours you put in to make this multi-cloud approach actually work at scale.
Mhm.
So like maybe for bigger companies, for larger projects that are more complex, that have specific requirements, that would make sense. But like in most cases, I don't see a huge benefit that could like top uh, the way it can become more complex, to be
Right.
honest. So I haven't had such a use case where this was clearly um, yeah, a scenario, to be honest, like in the projects I've been with. Um, but yeah,
Yeah.
that's like the way I look at it.
Yeah. Makes sense. I feel the same way. I I've had a couple of people like try to explain to me the multi-cloud thing, and then I'm always like, but what about this? But what about this? And there's never like a good answer as to why. Yeah, but
Mm,
but if I just do it this way in the same cloud, I get the same result. And there's never a good response to my playing devil's advocate. So that's why I never really got into the multi-cloud thing because it didn't make a heck of
mm,
a lot of sense. Uh, yeah,
mm.
totally makes sense. So I guess a couple of things that we can leave people with. Number one, yes, on-prem is a thing. I don't think it ever wasn't, despite what marketing tells us. Number two, hybrid cloud is absolutely a thing. So look into that for your organization if you're thinking about having workloads on-prem. So again, GCP, you can look at Anthos, AWS, EKS Anywhere, and AWS Outposts, and then Azure Stack HCI.
Azure Arc
Azure Arc, thank
as
you.
well.
Yes, Azure Arc and Azure Stack HCI. Yes. Yeah, Azure Arc is interesting as well. Like if you want to manage, because I think with Azure Arc, you can manage Kubernetes clusters anywhere,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
Same thing with
That's
Anthos, which is really cool.
mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Like you could even, if you connect, they have also like Azure Arc enabled servers, so you could
Mm,
connect your servers to Azure Arc, and then you could like schedule all the updates and patches on those servers automatically.
yeah.
So yeah, there are some interesting functionality that those services have. So totally, that's hybrid is totally a thing.
Yeah. So I would say definitely start hybrid before or test hybrid to before you decide to rip down everything out of the cloud and do all the
Yeah,
on-premise.
and maybe like before, because like even before, like testing out, of course, that
Yeah.
experimenting, it's always great, but like also think about that it's like what do you actually need, because
Mm,
we also, it's important to remember about managed services, why they cost and what do they actually provide, like
mm,
in terms of redundancy, security, what is managed for you for that service versus what you would need to do to manage this service in the same manner
yeah.
and at a good scale and with good security if you were not to use managed service, right? Because that's like why you pay a little bit more for these services, because you don't need to manage much yourself. But if you are comparing that, you would need to account for the hours you put into managing and keeping these services secured and scalable, also as cost, and see if it's worth
Yeah.
doing just public cloud or doing hybrid and introducing the on-prem setup as well if you don't have it from before.
Right. Yeah. Makes sense. Yeah. Definitely test the on-prem stuff because there's nothing quite like troubleshooting an issue for 2 days and then realizing that it was just a random port isn't open on the firewall or something. Those are the things that you run into on-prem that kind of get you scratching your head. So
Yeah. Oh
yeah.
my. And maybe be skeptical as well when you like hear the messages everyone must go to on-prem now. Everyone must go ditch public cloud. All messages in that style, I am personally always skeptical to,
Yeah.
because there is no everyone must do it this and this and this
Yeah.
way. It doesn't work like that. Like you mentioned, Michael, organizations do things differently and have different requirements, and you can't just uh, tell that it will be beneficial in 100% of cases to do it this only way,
Right.
because it's not like that in reality. So be skeptical about this, such
Yeah.
messages.
And always test. I mean, just I- whatever you're gonna do, always just give it a shot and see like if it could actually even work. Right. Try to emulate it as much as possible, because for whatever reason, I feel like a lot of people don't do that anymore. A lot of people just kind of implement what they see, but just really, really test it out just to see that what you're attempting has, at least a 80-90% chance of working. Because testing the whole on-prem theory is hard if you don't have a data center, and you can't have a data center if you don't move the stuff, and you can't move the stuff unless you properly test. So just try to emulate as much as possible.
Hmm.
Cool. All right. Anything else that you'd like to leave everybody with before we wrap up?
I think we just did. I think we
Awesome.
left a few thinking points for the listeners. And yeah, I guess if you would like to if you have some ideas on like the follow up, or you feel something, you would like to have a more detailed coverage on something around this topic, you could also reach out to us. We're always open for ideas.
Awesome. Sounds good. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for listening. And thank you, Christina.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Michael.